A change in political thought brings about fresh ideas. Changes make people aspirational. But in order to meet people's expectations, new ideas must flourish and be implemented with a clear thinking and not just emotions. Welcome to The Matrix. A New Idea of India, a book which was released recently, is a rich contribution to the much needed intellectual discourse for today. It makes more sense when read in contrast with The Idea of India, as propounded by Sunil Khilnani. In his bestseller book, the comparison generates an interesting debate and gives clarity on ideas that are relevant for us today. A New Idea of India has been written by two young scholars, Harsh Madhusudan and Rajiv Mantri. It captures the present day emotions and the reality. This book argues that the past vision of pluralistic idea of India is now redundant, and India needs to reimagine its course, which is practical and real in approach. The course correction must address the concerns of both Hindus and non-Hindus and help Muslims bring about reforms in their community. Today, I have with me online two distinguished guests, senior journalist Shekhar Iyer and Ali Khan Mahmoodabad, who is a Cambridge University scholar, columnist and assistant professor at Ashoka University. A very warm welcome to both of you. I begin by asking you, Shekhar sir, do you think there is a need for us today to reimagine the idea of India?
Well, we can reimagine India, but in that reimagination, we can, there is no, sky is the limit for imagination or for reimagination. But basically, I think what we consider India or what that the commonality that we share, that is not going to change by new definitions. What we need to look at is that whatever has come to us as our heritage, what we say virasat, that has to be valued by everybody. It is not that a particular heritage is valuable to me or a particular heritage is valuable to somebody. Unless we look at what we have inherited as a common heritage and a common richness that has come through various layers, until we need to look at that. But what has happened is over the last few years, we have been caught up more in what I would say an identification sometimes thrust upon us, an identification sometimes that has grown over the years. Consequently, as individuals also, as this particular book has talked about, that as individuals, somewhere we lose our voice and we are all carried away by whatever is showered on us or we are forced to embrace. Consequently, what we are seeing is there is a too much of conflict in our mind, in the individual mind. And also, India has always meant, through the years, through the centuries it has traveled. One thing that has kept this thing going is the sense of hope, the sense of the belief that we can overcome anything. And that is also the spiritual and cultural tradition of this country, that nothing is insurmountable and nothing is permanent. Everything is in passing. But we have to imbibe this more because that is the only way we can regain the sense of hope, the sense of confidence, and the sense of the belief that all of this belongs to me. It doesn't matter. And another thing we have to understand, Athir, I think we need to understand, we are all accidents of birth. None of us had a choice being this or that. This identity that we got as a small child has carried us through adulthood. Sometimes it has helped us, sometimes it has not helped us. But at the same time, the individual in us, that the individual that seeks forever, to be united with the vast expanse, that has a spiritual dimension, no matter which faith you follow or you don't follow any faith. The constant earning in you to be part of something bigger than yourself. This is the basic thing. But in this search, I don't know, we get lost on all kinds of things that doesn't actually give us what we are looking for. I think what I would say is instead of looking at a new India from a political prism, which the book may be suggesting, I would rather say we have to go beyond that. Let's not, say that there should be a political India. India, as we understand this land which has been described in our ancient scriptures as Bharatavarsha, and that Bharatavarsha was not so political, but rather more spiritual. That which observed everything and which gave back everything. That is the reason why this land has received so much from everywhere. Yes, it has also suffered scars of different kinds and continues to hurt itself. We have to admit something, but the way forward is we will have to regenerate hope, and that hope has to be regenerated among our future generation. See, if constantly people say, "Oh, things are getting bad," and I mean, we are filling each other with more fear.
Yes.
We are filling each other with more, I would say, lack of confidence. All as if we are all out, media included. That there's so much of lack of faith in ourselves and in the future and in our ability to overcome as an individual, as a collective, as a community. I think these are the things that we need to address, because that only we can evolve as a happy nation. See, frequently this happy index is done, of different countries, how happy people are. And in all those countries that score high on happiness, you will always see people, who are, people are people, human beings are human people. जितना भी आप जमा कपड़ा पहना दो ना, आदमी तो आखिरी आदमी ही है. His fears, his hopes, or her fears or her hopes or whatever, he or she. The basic things are common, because nothing is going to change the fact that we are human beings first. And life has its own enigma at an individual level, at a collective level, as a country, as a nation. There will never be a time you can say, "Bas, sab kuch theek hai." ऐसा कभी नहीं होगा. It will never happen, because that is the way life is. But at the same time, I think it is better to live every day, every moment with lot of hope, with lot of enthusiasm, lot of appreciation, lot of positive energy, and look beyond the present politics. See, politics is always about power struggle, and power struggle involves evoking sense of fear, sense of lack of hope, fear of disentitlement. So when if you this is going to be there, it has always been there. But I think if we can get away from the prism of politics and look at ourselves and think, look, if we have come on this earth, if Allah or Ishwar or whoever has created us and put us on this earth, definitely it has to be a greater purpose than day-to-day politics. So I would say that, look, this is the moment to regenerate hope. This is a moment to regenerate confidence. This is a moment to regenerate confidence, not as an individual, as a collective also.
Right.
Because that is a way forward. And we have to look at all that is around us is our heritage. All that is around us is our strength. No matter how they appear to be contradictory, in state of conflict, whatever it is. And unless we begin to see this, because I always believe in the adage, seeing is believing. At the same time, believing is also seeing. Once you start believing in future with hope, with positivity, and with the broad idea that we shall overcome. And this we need to tell our generations to come. We need to tell our children. We need to tell ourselves. We need to tell our colleagues. Atir, why I'm saying this? Unless you are struck by something a serious personal crisis, either an ailment in your family or to your loved one, or something that is very challenging, that's the time you realize
Yes.
that entire world, the way you look at, is different from the world as it is. Because I've gone through such situations, and I can tell you, it's amazing, it's awesome what we are capable of. We are not what the politics of the day paints us. We are not what, way things appear to be. We are not that. No matter how many stories you hear of hate, you hear stories of the worst, I would say, the human side of behavior, of killings, atrocities, deliberately causing pain to others. No matter how many stories you hear, there will always be stories that will tell you that it's not like that. I think this country has to regrow itself on those stories. They may be isolated, they may be far and few, but that's the stories we need to tell ourselves.
Yes.
I think that's a way forward for New India. Otherwise, we
Very
are going to get lost in this, and we are going to get lost in all the kind of academic debates going on. This is right, that is wrong, that is this, too much of noise. Because at the end of the day, what do we all clamor for? Some peace and some happiness, isn't it?
true.
Very well said, sir. Now, I would like to ask Ali Khan Mahmoodabadi Sahab that do you think that Indian Muslims need a fresh vision today?
So, look, I think any community at any point constantly needs to look within for a better future. By merely doing or following an old model, one doesn't necessarily chart a path towards a better future. At the moment, there's of course a perception amongst Muslims, and when we use the term Muslims, as I said, it's a tremendously diverse community in terms of ethnicity, sectarian affiliation, um, linguistic, linguistic, and so on, and caste, of course. Um, so one cannot speak about a homogeneous entity called the Muslim of India. However, in recent years, of course, one has seen the rise of, a kind of politics that premises itself on antagonism towards the Muslims. And that has led to a perception. And I think in 2019-20, when the CAA protests were taking place, a lot of these differences between Muslims, sectarian, caste, class, ethnic, linguistic, were overcome. And actually, that was a moment in which the young people, women in particular, were thinking about new ways of doing politics. I think one of the problems has been that so much focus ever since independence up until now, and unfortunately the BJP continues the same trend, is that by making religion the primary category, and of course the problem in this is that Muslims are being persecuted in a sense, or targeted because of their religion. But at the same time, making religion the primary category through which you sort of uh, address a community leads to a problem where the political representation of the community, the interlocutors have often been religious leaders. And if you look at from 1947 all the way up until now, for various reasons, and of course there's not enough time to get into them, religious leaders have naturally been inclined to demand religious rights, ethnic or linguistic rights, or cultural rights. And therefore, the politics of Muslims have often revolved around these very emotional topics. And unfortunately, there has been no leadership, or there's been a very negligible community leadership that has actually focused on economic growth, on security, on jobs. And now, unfortunately, we're at a situation where, the community feels besieged. Now, whether people agree with this or not, this is the self-perception of a community. And even now, there's a kind of double speak. So on the one hand, there's outreach to the Muslims from various senior members of the RSS, from the BJP itself, the Prime Minister encouraging Pasmanda politics, while at the same time, structurally speaking, in society, there are attacks. At the local basis, nationally, it's happening. And also, for example, the delimitation that's taking place in various parts of the country, particularly Assam, is sending a very mixed signal. So, I see this as a positive personally, because when a community feels besieged, is going through a crisis, I think that can be its most creative moment. I think it can look at ideas afresh, jettison those ideas that have not really helped. But at the same time, one needs some basic modicum of security, tranquility, and ability to engage in this. And at the moment, I feel while at a wider, more abstract theoretical level, yes, it is a good time. Unfortunately, uh, Muslims are feeling, politically excluded. culturally, socially marginalized, and there's violence. Now, who's blamed for the violence and so on? That's a completely different question. But I think it is the right time. It is the right moment. A lot of things are not in the community's hands, but this is the time to go forward and, in a sense, articulate a vision for the future. But the last thing I would say, which is important, is this articulation cannot happen unless everyone sitting at the table is treated as an equal. Um, Unfortunately, a situation has been created, and then to demand some kind of political uh, maturity from a community that feels besieged is not something that is going to lead to anywhere. So the first thing is to actually sit down, make people feel like they're stakeholders, equal stakeholders in a constitutional democracy that our country is, and then not have this signaling, this mixed signaling. On the ground there's violence, the leadership is sending a different message, chief ministers of some states are almost spouting hate speech, other people are saying other. So there's, it's very confused at the moment from the point of view of the average Muslim. And it is important before anything to create an atmosphere in which dialogue and mutual trust is developed in order to articulate this vision, which is indeed very important as we
Right.
where we stand today.
Right. Sheikh Saab, now I'd like to ask you that in the backdrop of so-called Muslim appeasement, policies which Indian Hindus have had a sense of neglect, a feeling of lack of parity, for example, in civil laws are not uniform. So, they have been talking about it. How can the government address this situation?
Well, there are two dimensions. Right now we were just seeing what the average Muslim feels. The sense of aggrievement, sense of alienation, that is on one side. The other side, there is a feeling which is, again, for various reasons, is constantly perpetuated in terms of perception, that look, the partition was caused by those very factors which emphasized on this identity. And after the partition also, we are still stuck with the same problem that originally caused the partition. And there are parties out there which are not ending that mindset which created partition, because partition left behind such scars, and those scars were not allowed to heal or could not heal, because even subsequent to that, people who could not go, though people who favored partition, many of them could not go. Many of them realized that it is not a dream that they can chase. Even those who stayed back felt, look, having stayed back, they expected that the things would not be different. But the problem was, at that time, it was felt, look, let those who sought partition and who moved away, and a country that was created on the basis of religion, let them be so, we will be different. So therefore the idea was, we will be a different country, we will treat everyone equally, there will be no such. On a concept it was good, but the reality down was, because of the scars of partition, see, having one nation being created purely on religious lines, it was expected the one that was left behind, at least now it will respect who we are.
Right.
That for some reason could not happen, because those who were rulers then felt, no, we are a secular nation. A secular nation means I don't recognize anything. But that was not to be. Because of the pressures of politics, all the time there was an attempt. I am not saying the Muslims themselves demanded this, but at least there were people who posed themselves as leaders of the community, and who kept on working on this for this reason. Look, we are different. We have a different identity. Our problems are different. Our issues are different. Therefore, we cannot be part of what is all common. So this thing, went, and it got encouraged by politics also.
Yes.
So much so, we reached a stage where whatever is there, it has to be different for Muslims, because they cannot compromise on the identity, and if anything is done, it is a question of the identity. Now, this got more and more hardened, rightly or wrongly or whatever. I'm not getting into that. But consequently, a situation was reached where instead of getting that opportunity and the time to heal partition, we saw the wound being kept alive by various forces.
Yes.
Rather, if an ideal situation would have been after the partition, if there was some kind of a reconciliation, look, we have been all inherited a history for which we are not responsible.
Yes.
And if we had accepted and gone on a reconciliation, look, nobody need feel like, for instance, caste system. Caste system left behind terrible scars. And the
Yes.
burden of that caste system was imposed on people who happened to be the upper caste. So they were repeatedly told, look, your ancestors were responsible for all this. Now I'm giving a
Yes.
good example because, so therefore you are somewhere responsible.
You're right.
And that again was that for political reason. Where the numbers were more, they hit back with more casteism. They hit back with more emphasis on their caste. I am a Thakur,
Right.
I am a Brahman, I am this, I am that. Whereas at the lower end, they continue to suffer. And
Yes.
it was made out that Brahmins carry the burden of a casteism which is thousands and thousands years old. So when you had a problem like Mandal Commission report, there were so many youths who happened to belong to upper caste who said, look, if my forefathers have done all this, how am I responsible? A question that today an average Muslim youth would be asking. I do not know, what happened,
Yes.
who broke the temples, who built mosques, who were the rulers, who were the conquerors, what they wanted to do. But every
Right.
time I am held responsible, every time I am looked at with suspicion. So I think the reconciliation was necessary to reconcile. Look, but what we have done is, just as in dealing with the caste issues, we have been in a state of denial. Because we are in a state of denial, what has happened is the alienation gets strengthened. The feeling that we have not been valued. There is a denial of history. And those who claim to be part of the left movement, who felt, look, the more you talk about this identity politics, particularly of the Hindu identity, that is in conflict with us. So consequently, history was told in a state of denial.
Right.
That there is a way of history. You had again others who countering that, look, that is not the history, because that's a deliberate attempt to suppress facts. I think ideally, I'm not saying South Africa is the best example today. Just as Nelson Mandela, made an attempt at reconciliation. Look, there is no point in going back in history. No point in blaming people today for what happened years ago.
Yes.
And when there is also doubt whether it has happened or did not happen, or may have happened. There may be evidences, there may not be evidences. The point is, at this stage, let us say, look, we are all burdened with history. We are all burdened with memories that have been passed on from generation to generation. That shows that, yes, as a nation, we have suffered terrible scars. If that reconciliation is attempted, even now, I say it is not late. See, I'm giving an example. When this Janvapi issue started, RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat came out with a statement saying, don't look for a shivling inside every mosque.
Yes.
Enough. Some people said, because there was import in that statement. But some people disputed, saying, no, this is nothing, this is RSS just, this is only a way to, it's not the real feelings. Because whenever such statements come and we continue to look at in terms of what has happened or what is happening or past, everything combined. So the cynicism in us, dismisses it. But the fact is this, I think we need to reconcile. Yes, we have been burdened with memories and traditions of history, which has left many things have happened. But let us put it behind.
Yes.
Let us start today. Yes, and that would require what? That would require the leaders of the community to come forward and say, look, that some things have happened of which we are not responsible. We value your tradition. We just expect to value our tradition. Our tradition is not in conflict. And basically, we as Muslims in India have very little to do with Muslims everywhere. And that people are realizing. You see, if you go to Saudi Arabia, you go to Middle East, you go anywhere. Accepting the faith, there's nothing else is common. Culture, food, family values, everything is different. This is also very
Yes.
perceived. So let us limit faith to be a source of strength. And I think we need to really
Mm.
follow the actual what is being said by our faith, by our religion. We have moved away from that.
Sure.
I'm not saying this religion or
Sure.
that religion. But so therefore it is up to
Mm.
the communist leaders, religious leaders to go back and say, look, let us not live in denial. Let us accept, like just as we heard what the average Muslim feels, we have to accept that. We cannot simply dismiss it away. Yes, there is fear, there is a lack of hope. But of course, people will say the responsibility dwells on the majority community to assure the minority community. But similarly, I would say it also devolves upon the leadership of the minority community to convey the message, look, we are not different, we are here, we are together. And
Yes.
let us
Yes.
address the governance issues. That would require what? We don't allow ourselves to become vote banks.
Sure. Sure.
And if there
So
are parties with distinctly saying we are for the welfare of Muslims, you have Muslim League still by name, you have a Majlis, which still very firm. I mean, their concept is very clear. So if you have parties which only speak of one section, obviously you are leaving room for the other section. Only thing the numbers is making the difference to politics. See, when so long as this was going on, people thought it is
sure.
secularism. So if we have to be honest with ourselves, the best way is, look, this identity will not work. And this identity is not giving us best of governance. Because the problem that
Right.
face our community, whether Hindus or Muslim, a lot of is common and lot
Mm.
of is very specific. There is a
Right.
lot of specific
Right.
problems. So those have to be
Right.
addressed. And that is the only way
Sure.
to end the sense of alienation, and that would require mutual respect.
So, so I have a related question now. Uh, Ali Khan Sahab, do you think that Indian Muslims have now, there's no doubt about it, that they've realized that there's a need for reforms within the community. Do you agree for reforms to happen, Muslim need to have a proactive approach rather than, uh, you know, dilly-dallying or saying that, we'll do it another day, we'll do it our way. Uh, and since you also said that Indian Muslims are not a homogeneous group, do you think at certain level they will need government support, uh, you know, to undertake these reforms, and it's best that they do not alienate themselves? What are your views?
So, look, I mean, the question of reform is a loaded question, and depends on what kind of reforms you're speaking about. I presume you're talking about religious reforms. Um, I mean, if you pick up history books from
Both
anywhere in
both
the world.
religious and social reforms. Both
So, look, I
religious
mean,
and
I
social
think
reforms.
so. Before coming to the Muslims, Dr. Ambedkar, after the constitution was ratified, said that the political experiment of this constitutional revolution will fail because this country has had no social revolution. In a sense, I mean, that's a whole other debate, but in a sense, the constitution espoused values that were partly derived from and incubated and organically arose in Europe over the course of 300 years, Enlightenment principles. And of course, Europe went through huge social churn, bloodshed, change, and so on. We acquired independence, but very little actually was done in any community, really. 19th century, there were religious reformist movements amongst most communities, but really after partition, especially as my colleague was saying, uh, Pakistan was created on the basis of religion, uh, categories got entrenched. Now, as far as the Muslims are concerned, as I was saying earlier, I don't think any community genuinely and organically takes up reform if it is compelled to do so from the outside. It just doesn't work. I mean, it'll become more conservative. It'll become harder in a certain sense. And so, any reform that has to happen organically from within, and that fundamentally requires a playing field which is one that encourages um, debate, and does not stigmatize. And at the moment, again, I feel that the political uh, th- any debate about reform is basically pushed under the carpet, swept under the carpet, because for many Muslims, look, I'm a very privileged person. I can very easily sit here and talk to you about X number of things socially and religiously that need to be reformed. But for the average Muslim, who actually hasn't benefited from appeasement, because if you look at the Sachar Committee report, it basically says, despite this appeasement, on most social economic indices, Muslims, and that's just become worse, the Muslims are backward. Um, and right now, at least again, the perception is that we are surviving. So if you're in survival mode, you're going to use your identity as an anchor. You're going to use it as a shield. It's highly unlikely that anyone is going to be open to ideas, theological or social or any other ideas of reform. And so the first and most important thing to do is to actually reassure the community that no, we see you as equal citizens of India. We see you as people who have an equal stake in India, an equal participation in India. And this violence that, I call it a slow motion riot. I think as Indians, and it's happening for all communities, right? I mean, it's not just Muslims. We as a country have become accustomed to violence, and in a sense, we're numb to it. Uh, Muslims in particular are in these days, and other places, since you've asked about Muslims, have been targeted either through organized violence or through sporadic violence. All of this, is leading to an atmosphere where any kind of discussion about hope and the future reform is really difficult. And I appreciated what you said, sir, about hope, because it is ultimately hope that catalyzes any community to go forward. And unfortunately, again, there are enough examples from around the world. Any group or any organization or any community that falls into hopelessness is therefore a danger to others and a danger to itself. And therefore, the most important thing at this juncture, as my colleague was saying, is that an environment is created where we sit down and actually talk about and think about outside politics. I think politics is so polarized just now. It's impossible for two people to have a conversation without shouting at each other. But in society, don't let the politicians come. Sit down, social leaders, cultural leaders, religious leaders, let them sit down and talk about commonality and so on. Unfortunately, what's happening is that politics is and political leaders are mediating everything. They're mediating culture, language, history, social links, even talking about family values. And there is no independent discussion that is happening in the public sphere in society. And that is actually where it's very hard work. It's difficult. It's not glamorous work, but that is where the hard work needs to be put in. And there are plenty of examples. If you look at Gujarat, um, you know, in 2002, there was no violence in those places which had municipal councils that were neither BJP nor Congress. It's very interesting. It was local people who had a stake in governance. And so somewhere I think the kind of nature of our party politics has led to such polarized extremes. The BJP, of course, has pulled the center of Indian politics in a sense to the right. The opposition has reacted to this. And therefore, it's this highly kind of shrill, polarized discourse. And unfortunately, what we're forgetting about is that the average person has the same concerns. And of course, because of the nature of social media and media, the spectacle of violence, manufactured and often organic, in certain cases, is keeps people numb, keeps people distracted. And we go from one cycle of violence to another, right? So it was Manipur in the news, then that railway guy who shot 3 people. Now it's Haryana. If you look at the past few years and just track it, one of the things that is really, and the world is saying India is the next bull economy. But if you're not going to have political and social stability, eventually you will have economic instability and lack of growth. So these are tremendously important questions. And the first thing is to make people feel like they are equal parts of society, and
Sure.
have an equal stake.
Yeah, yeah, I got your point. Now, Shekhar Saab, I would like to, get a sense from you that we know that a lot of, there are violence, incidents of violence happening, but the social media is also magnifying, these incidents by putting up videos, all sorts of posts, and then there's a thread. There's a lot of discussion, so it magnifies. If there is one, incident, it is magnified into, and you, when you look at your social media timelines, it appears that the world is falling apart. But tell me that it's true that neither Hindus or Muslims seem to be satisfied with the present situation. What should be the priorities to address their concerns?
Well, I think the priority should be those very priorities that concern very basics of life, basics of living. I mean, we should focus more on education. Education of not just Muslims. I am talking of education of all sections of Hindu society also. Because
Right.
the lack of education, lack of exposure to understanding the world around us is largely responsible, because it's a frog in the well mentality which creates this kind of things, and you tend to believe what you see. And also, I think education, I would accord prime and it should be a quality education. See, our problem is, in the name of education, we talk of reforms and all that, but in terms of quality, what is the
Right.
quality of education we give? That is one. And I entirely agree with Professor Saab that, look, the reforms, whether it is about this community or that community, it should be left to them. And they must realize, and also we must look at our women folk. See, that's a very big area, if because women, I feel, they can be great harbingers of change. And that is why
Yes.
education, care and welfare of women, care of our children. So imagine if children are subjected to this kind of violence, whether it is passive violence or active violence on the social media, or they see it themselves, what kind of
Right.
impression it is going to leave. So education, the need for creating an environment where people, look at themselves, way to better themselves. I would urge upon people to take care of schemes that reskill yourself. Some are traditional skills, some communities have had a mastery of those skills. Let those things, let the community get going, because there will never be a time we'll say let all this subside, then we'll move forward. And
Sure.
also to increase, I think it's very important. We just talked about our growing economy. You see that everyone has a stake in that economy. That's the only way to ensure peace. Otherwise, if you have a situation where some people are, seem to be well off and all others are suffering, then all
Yes.
these negative ideas, they easily get into your head. And
Yes.
your grievance over something else will spill over to something else. And
True.
you tend to blame the other for what you are undergoing. So
Right.
therefore, the idea is spread education, give good health care, ensure, everybody has a basic home to live, basic,
Yes.
amenities, because wherever you hear these violence, those are places which are basically slums, where children don't go to school. And those are the places where, a cheap mobile can, you can see all kinds of nonsense that is being peddled on the social media. That is where the violence starts.
Sure.
So I think these are the things. And also, and let us, as Professor Saab was saying, we should get other people to talk. Let us, and we are not obliging anyone. We are, because everybody has a right to a good quality life. Everybody has a right to peace. Everybody has a right for his future and the future of his generation, of his children. I think
Right.
that's the spirit with which we must move forward. And I believe, barring the pockets where you are seeing all these things, by and large, no matter what community we belong to, we are a peace-loving people.
Sure.
We are by nature very peace-loving. We don't like jhagda janjat. And
Yes.
I can tell you, whenever you hear this thing has happened or this thing has happened, or somebody has been killed on the basis of religious identity, that pains us. Whether it was
Yes.
the case of a tailor in Jodhpur, or whether it is case of a people, somewhere caught because they were suspected to be cattle smuggling, whatever. All this will
Yes.
pain us, because a human pain cannot be a Hindu pain and a Muslim pain. It cannot
True.
be.
Absolutely.
And also, I think the Bollywood, particularly our films, can again play a big part. In the
Yes. Yes.
aftermath of partition, you saw a lot of films that were produced emphasized on this.
Yes.
This Bhaichara was deliberately emphasized. The
Mhm.
characters were also brought into movies of that period because that was needed for healing. I think we need to get back to that. We
Right.
need more of such good stories,
Right. Good
because that
point.
is the only, otherwise we'll remember only the bad story, and then, you know, whatever you believe, you'll ultimately you'll start seeing it also. So I think these are the ways where we can definitely
Yeah, discourse. Yeah,
we can
flow.
do something. Definitely we can do something.
Right.
Uh, Ali Khan Saab, do you agree that the victimhood syndrome, which has been there in our community, it and it's been there, do you think that it's a self defeatist attitude and undermine the well being of our community? I mean, what can we do to address this, this problem?
So, look, I think any kind of identity politics thrives on the idea of victimhood. So, frankly, I mean, the problem and amongst the Muslims is no different. And often, you have communities that have been the victims of historical injustice for centuries, and once they come into power, they become the oppressor. So, being a victim in itself is not a guarantee of anything.
True. Absolutely.
Secondly, yes, victim, the idea of victimhood. I think Muslims, so there are two types of things here, right? One at the moment is this kind of idea of every day being targeted for your identity, right? That in the last few days, I've got text messages saying, "Oh, young students of mine or others, should I shave off my beard? Should I not wear these clothes? These kind of things, right?" So that's one kind of fear that, and I don't think that's born out of circumstances. But the other kind of victimhood that is a community victimhood is actually perpetuated by people with vested interests.
Right.
Um, I'll take a minute to tell you a very interesting anecdote. In 1912, Allama Shibli Nomani, who was a great Muslim scholar, uh, he wrote an article called "Leaderon ka Qusur hai ya leader banane walon ka," and it was published in the Muslim Gazette. And in those days, this is 1912, he said, Muslims have no political leaders, all they have are religious leaders. This is 1912. And he listed all the people who were active in politics. He dismissed them. He said, these are all religious leaders. He said, until we have a Gokhale in our community, we are not going to be able to move forward. And he gives the reason himself. And he's a religious scholar, he's an alim deen. He says, um, if religious leaders do carry forward the responsibility of political leadership, all they will do is entrench identity and create the words he uses is apni apni ded eent ki masjid ta'mir karenge, and actually they will not really care about the community in terms of taking it forward. And so he says a very strong sentence. He says, until such a time as a person who is fit to carry out this duty emerges, the मुसलमानों की क़यादत की कुर्सी खाली रहना चाहिए, the chair for political leadership. And unfortunately, I think the reality is, while there are a lot of people who've claimed the mantle of Muslim leadership since 1947, actually the tragedy has been that there has been or hardly been any figures that have not tried to entrench this idea of victimhood and so on, despite the fact that of course the community has been targeted in Congress times, and of course now it's being targeted. People have taken advantage of the community, and the I always kind of find it very funny that one of the victimhood things is based on this idea of appeasement. It's a counter kind of impulse to appeasement. And the Muslim League before partition in 1937, it lost the elections to the communists. So even then, Muslims were not voting en bloc. So I think again, when we talk about with these huge labels, when parties take on the responsibility of representing these labels, we are doing a huge disservice. Any kind of victimhood, unfortunately, only eventually leads to resentment, to bitterness, to a kind of, and you're seeing this in every community, right? I mean, at the moment, it's not just the Muslims. The historical injustices and so on are being, young people from the rural countryside are talking about historical injustice as if they are the ones who have to avenge them. And as my colleague said, Shikhar Saab said, it is not, we don't have to carry that baggage and burden of history. victimhood, Hannah Arendt says this, if I'm persecuted as a Jew, then I will fight back as a Jew, not as a Frenchman, as a German, and so on. But at the same time, that cannot, I would add to that victimhood cannot be the only lens through which I demand my political rights. At some point, you have to rise beyond victimhood. Unfortunately, at the moment, again, the atmosphere is vitiated and not one in which even every day, the idea of just being a victim walking on the road is something so, stark that people feel, as if they are, as if they cannot step out of houses and so on and so forth. But the biggest responsibility does fall on religious leaders who take advantage of emotions, who take advantage of people's suffering, who take advantage of history's rights and wrongs, none of which are very black and white, to re-entrench at a community level the idea of victimhood, because ultimately that, in a sense, only does the work of shutting down and creating walls around a community. And it goes for the Hindus as much as it goes for the Muslims. And I think in this way, the Sikhs are a very admirable community to a large extent, because you see in 1984 the kind of violence and the kind of systematic structural violence they encountered and the way they bounced back from that, socially, economically. They did not let themselves be defined by it, though they remember it. So one cannot remember injustice, but one has to move beyond it, not be shackled.
Right. Very, very well said. Now I'd like to thank both my guests, Shekhar Sahab, Ali Khan Sahab. It's been a wonderful, discussion. The implementation of the vision of our past leaders and its follow-up by the subsequent dispensation could not bring about the desired results. Identity politics, the principal driver behind the partition of India, has worsened ever since independence and has created a rift between Hindus and Muslims. India's democracy is its biggest strength. All communities need to have an unwavering trust in its institutions and must respect the rule of law to keep us together. Only when we have achieved these requisites, we can hope for our collective dreams to come true. You may like to read my article on this topic on our news portal Awaz-The Voice. Type www.awazthevoice.in. You will also find a link to my article in this post below. That's all we have for this week. We'll be back soon. Till then, goodbye from the Matrix team.